It is March 20th, 1393, 9 p.m. And in the center of Prague, this scene unfolds. A group of men brings a lifeless body to Charles Bridge and silently throws it into the Vltava River. These men are there on the direct orders of the King of Bohemia, Wenceslaus IV. And that lifeless body, as we now know dead, belongs to the general vicar of the Archbishop of Prague, John of Nepomuk. The second most important figure of the Prague Archbishopric, now known as Saint John Nepomucene, had died just hours earlier, after brutal torture and under circumstances that are still shrouded in mystery. In any case, it is clear that, as a priest, he was not subject to the king's jurisdiction but to ecclesiastical law, and therefore it was murder. So now, the evidence must be erased. However, this plan ultimately fails. While the fall from the bridge marks the end of John's earthly journey, it also marks the beginning of an even more fascinating journey. At the end of it, more than 6 centuries later, John Nepomucene is regarded as the patron saint of the Czech lands. And abroad, he is by far the most famous canonized figure of Czech origin. On European bridges alone, there are about 30,000 statues of him, and he is also popular in Latin America and Asia. And this is his story. John was born around 1340 in today's Nepomuk in southwestern Bohemia. His father served as a mayor in the town, but nothing is known about his mother. John first attended school at the local church, then he studied with the monks at the Green Hill Monastery, which at that time belonged to his hometown, and later at the Charles University of Prague. Before his 30th birthday, he began working as a public notary at the Archbishopric of Prague. He became a good expert in canon law, and with that, he progressed in the church hierarchy. When he completed his doctorate at the University of Padua in Italy in 1387, the peak of his career began. He worked as a priest and advocate at the Basilica of St. Peter and Paul at Prague's Vyšehrad, and in 1389, he was chosen by Prague's Archbishop John of Jenstein as his general vicar. John was known to him from his notarial work, and he knew him to be a smart and honest man. At this point, it's necessary to understand what was happening with the Catholic Church in Europe at the time. We are in the difficult period of the Papal Schism. The Church is divided, with 2 elected popes. One resides in Rome, the other in the French city of Avignon, and each is recognized by different European monarchs. And essentially, everyone wants to take advantage of the situation. This is also true for the King of Bohemia and Holy Roman Emperor, Wenceslaus IV. He is a ruler of fluctuating moods, weak morals, and subject to the intrigues of his noble favorites. All of this is a thorn in the side of the zealous Archbishop John of Jenstein, and their relations have been worsening since the 1380s. In 1392, Wenceslaus decides to limit the archbishop's power by establishing a new bishopric and appointing one of his own men to its head. The situation plays into his hands. The Benedictine monastery in Kladruby is led by an old dying abbot, and the king plans to block the election of a successor after his death, dissolve the monastery, and use its wealth for his new bishopric. At the beginning of 1393, the abbot dies, but the king remains unaware, distracted by pleasures at his castles. The church seizes the opportunity. The monks elect a new abbot, and the king's objection period quietly begins. It expires on March 10th, and General Vicar John Nepomucene promptly confirms the election. The new abbot is in office, and the king's plan is thwarted. When the king learns of these events, he is furious. He threatens that the archbishop's men will pay with their lives. Vicar John Nepomucene, therefore, seeks exile in the archbishop's castle in Rudnica. However, they try to resolve the crisis peacefully. So, on the morning of March 20th, the archbishop and his closest associates meet with the king and his men in Prague. However, the meeting does not go as planned. The king starts shouting and has 4 men from the archbishop's entourage arrested. John of Jenstein himself likely escapes only due to his personal guard. The 4 prisoners are first taken to the Prague's town hall. 3 of them are then moved to the town court, where there was a torture chamber. In the end, only John remains. The other 2 are released after a brief torture and taking an oath of silence. The reason why John is not released remains a subject of speculation. Church legend says that the king tried to extract information from him about what his wife, Sophia of Bavaria, had told him during confession. There would be reasons for this. The king was jealous of her, and there is a preserved letter from him with thoughts about divorce and remarriage. However, contemporary historians consider the theory about the revelation of the Queen's secrets to be unlikely. They find it hard to believe that the Queen's confessor could have been someone from the opposing camp. In any case, John is tortured in the presence of the king, who is said to have burned his side with a torch. The poor vicar is then stretched on a rack, hung by his arms tied behind his back, and brutally beaten. The examination of his remains in 1993 showed a broken facial part of the skull, a shattered upper jaw, a broken lower jaw, brain hemorrhaging, a broken scapula, and a dislocated shoulder. It's no surprise that John died on the spot, though for many years it was believed that the cause of death was drowning in the river. If the king wanted to hide his act, he was out of luck. 4 weeks later, the body was found by fishermen. It is said that 5 lights were seen around it, which is why John Nepomucene is often depicted with 5 stars. He was initially buried in the Order of the Cross Knights Monastery, and later, his remains were transferred to Prague's St. Vitus Cathedral. When his tomb was opened in 1719, a piece of organic matter was found inside his skull. It was believed to be a part of his tongue, and thus considered a miracle, illustrating the legend of his martyrdom for the preservation of the seal of confession. Events then progressed quickly, and just 10 years later, John Nepomucene was declared a saint. Today, he is the patron of sailors, clergy, and the seal of confession, and he is invoked for protection against floods. And still, more and more people walk across Charles Bridge, where they gently rub the metal plaque beneath his statue, in the spot where, with great probability, his body was thrown into the river, remembering the sad fate of this great man. A man who wasn't afraid to stand up to those in power.